Okay, this is a feedback for Nexus, a general feedback for the piece. So I'll start with what you got working for you. The posture is very natural. Uh, there's nothing wrong with the anatomy. Obviously, for everything you can nitpick, but I don't think it's necessary here. Um, like everything looks very natural, proportionate. So I'm going to mostly focus on the coloring and stuff. Oh, there's only one thing that I wanted to mention about the posture. I guess it kind of pertains to coloring because it shows when you have coloring on. But for things like blocked body parts, in this case, the mouth, if you want to go that route, it's best if you just cover it up completely. Um, like just moving this up slightly like this would help a lot. Um, because when it's drawn like this, if it's black and white, if it's just manga, sometimes you can get away with it. But the mouth on the face is like basically here. Let's say she's smiling. So the entire mouth should be visible, and if you don't draw at least a corner of it, it's going to look like you either didn't finish it or you are deliberately trying to hide something for in order to not draw it. Um, and so it's best if you, like I said, move the hands up to cover those things up completely. Same thing for other kind of common obscuring, like hair over the eyes. Most people, especially when it's painted, it becomes really obvious where some parts, some spaces in between the bangs and stuff, still shows the face behind it, and there's no eye there, so it looks really, really weird that way. So just keep that in mind. The translation from black and white or line art to color is not as forgiving for those kind of stuff. In terms of coloring, you basically did a basic lighting. You shaded things, but you didn't quite decide where the light is coming from, and it's not necessary, I guess, because you chose a very ambiguous light source, kind of like frontal, but also all around, so that everything is well lit. There's some shadow, but it's not um, like a clear one direction spotlight. So it doesn't show up much, but I believe that having a definite light source always makes a picture stronger, even if you have to take a lot more time to work on it or to figure out where the shadows go, where the lighting goes. Um, so in this case, this becomes very flat because of the lack of that directional light. There is shadow everywhere, and the colors are basically you eye drop the same colors for every part of the body, even though some parts are in front of others. So, for instance, if you look at the webcam, if I do this from the front, you might notice that I don't think the shadows work that well here. Well, okay. You might notice that the highlights here is a lot stronger than that of my face because of the shape of my hand. It faces the light source directly, whereas my face doesn't really reflect that well because it's curved. And if I don't draw that, it would feel a lot like my hand is on the same flat plane as my face, and it makes me look flat. So that's the kind of effect that not deciding a light source has. And a really easy way to decide where the light source is to just create a multiply layer. I'm gonna clip this layer because you had it with transparent background, so it's easier to do. multiply layer, it doesn't really, you don't have to use the layer to paint. You just have to use the layer to show yourself where the shadows are. So it doesn't matter what color you use for shadows. All you're going for here is the shape. So let's say, I'll do two of them. Let's say the first one comes from this side. So light here, number one. So then that means that the shadow would be mostly on this side. 100%. Mostly on this side of the face. I'm gonna make it lighter, easier on the eye. And then that immediately tells you, oh, maybe I'll just do a layer mask. Okay. That immediately tells you, okay, all of this on this side should be in shadows, and then all of this down here should be in shadow, and then this probably is also in shadow because it's covered, blocked by her hands, and then this casts a stronger shadow onto her face, and then half of her head would also be in shadow. And then all of this hair here is in shadow. No, it doesn't really look too obvious when you use a light shadow color like this. But once you do this, you don't necessarily have to have a very strong contrast on every picture. It doesn't look nice like that. But what you want to get out of this is to know where the light comes from. And that having this here allows you to do other things, like if you want to keep the contrast low. Oh, I should get rid of the plug here. If you want to keep the contrast low, having this shape, so like I said before, I'm purely using this for its shape. Having this shape here, I'm gonna add a clipping mask. Wow, I can't add a, oh, create clipping mask. So having this here allows you to say, do this, or this. Just any sort of shading that really flatters the picture, but at the same time clearly, cohesively links the whole picture together in terms of lighting. And here, hair. Let's say I make the hair quite dark. I can't actually see because the sun is so strong outside. But you can still shade this hair. Like a little bit here and there with reflective light and all of that. Is it because it's multiply? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm gonna do this instead. Okay, let's start over. Having this shape here allows you to adjust the colors, but know for sure that you need to keep this border consistent because it needs to show where the lighting is. And then you can add darker shadows, but at the same time, because you preserve the shape, it's easier for you to figure out where the highlights ends and where the shadows begin. And then that means because all of this is in shadow, you can use a lot more highlights on this side of the hair since it's facing the light source. Okay, so something like this. So it's a lot clearer that the light is coming from this side. It's hard to paint someone else's drawing. I apologize. Uh, so it becomes clearer, and you can see the structure of this being in light, and then this being in shadow, and suddenly she has depth. She does not look too flat. You know where the horizontal front plane of her ends, and then the back plane, the side plane of her begins. And then this also allows you to, say, use different brighter, softer tones for different parts of the skin, different parts of the clothing, depending on their proximity to the lighting. Um, so this is something that you can think about doing for next time, and then the same thing can be done from the other side, but you can see how my decision making changed a lot based on where this first shadow was put in, even though in the end basically you can't see much of it in terms of its color. I painted over it a lot. I changed its color a lot. I can make this any other color, and I can still make use of the shape alone and uh, be able to help myself make the light and shadow decisions. And so that's one thing. The other thing is when it comes to shading, you don't necessarily have to shade everything. And when you do put in the shadow, you have to really think about why you put it there. So let's say um, there's a lot I want to say about this hair because you drew it like a flat board behind her, where hair usually does not come in that volume and it drapes all around you. So if when you sorry, when you put when you have long hair, unless you have like some sort of hair clip, most of the time, since the hair comes all around your head, it doesn't just go behind you. So it goes around, in front, and when it does stay in the back, it still wraps a little bit. So um, and then another thing about the hair is because it doesn't come in this volume, you can't just spread it out so far. Um, it would look more believable if it was more like this. So you see what I'm doing here. I'm wrapping it from the back to the front, and right now I'm not taking into account the shape of her shoulders and stuff, but that should also um, change how you decide to go about wrapping the hair. But let's keep it simple for now. Um, so something like this would make it a lot more believable because now you know where gravity is, and now you know the texture of her hair, which is soft and silky, or you can make it like stand up and all of that. But just by doing this, it tells you a lot about the material of the hair, which I think is very important. And most importantly, when you do this, when you are wrapping the hair shape and you're not just drawing it straight, um, it actually makes it a lot easier for you to paint, because the hardest thing to paint is when something is drawn really flat, because now you have to decide which part of the flat drawing do you make into not flat. Like for instance, when you drew the face, you probably think about it in terms of, okay, flat face and then eyes and then some nostrils, and you don't know where to wrap the face. Whereas if you say when you did draw the picture, you drew guidelines that show the curvature of the face, and then especially here when it shows the side of the face, that this area is where it starts to turn, it becomes a lot easier for you to decide, okay, I need to paint this part in because light bends there. And when you do paint it in, you can see very clearly what its effects are. So having the hair curve around, like just by using a solid brush and a solid color, I'm not even using any sort of shading things, shading brushes, it's already, there are already two layers, one in the front and then whatever that's in the back. And then you can do something like this, very simple, like you don't need to do much, and there's already more depth in the hair. So this is basically what you did up here, just you shaded it a lot because you felt like this is a big empty area, and therefore in order to show straight strands of hair, you decided to shade it like this. Um, the easier way to approach this is to, again, go by lighting. Forget that this is hair. Pretend this is a piece of paper. Go by lighting. Do something like this. Know where the hair wraps around the head and where it changes color in terms of it being closer to the light or wrapping, and so it doesn't reflect light as much. So just like here, it wraps around the head instead of wrapping around the arm. Like, I'm gonna draw this little skin showing just to give you a sense of how it wraps. And same thing here, just for example, I'm not going to say that you need to draw this. But right away you sort of see, okay, that's how it wraps. And then you can, based on this, you can add a little bit of highlights, which is just to emphasize what you were already doing. I'm going to use some simple colors here. And then, based on this, you can fine tune it by drawing hair strands. And if you notice, the thought process of this prevents me from drawing just straight up highlight shadow, or just straight up hair strands, or just being lost. I'm drawing texture. So I'm drawing texture on top of an otherwise flat surface, and in doing so, I only add texture where it's necessary. So now that I added this texture, you can see that there is supposed to be some sort of like hair strands, whatever, but it's not everywhere, and it does not need to be everywhere, because you, when your eyes look at this, it will think, oh, okay, it's hair, and then it will make sense of the rest. And just like how you look at my hair and you don't see the individual hair, even though this is real life, as real life as it gets, and there are individual strings, you don't really see it because you don't need to. What you see is a texture, and the steps to go towards this texture is actually not parallel to the direction of the hair. It's perpendicular to the direction of the hair, because I'm thinking of it as an entire surface before I add texture to it. Much like if you draw a rock surface, you don't draw individual little grains first. You draw a rock, a little bit of rock color, and then you draw maybe like some gradients to show lighting and big bumps in the rocks, and then you draw little, like, I don't know, cracks and little bumps here and there, and that's what shows what the material is. Same thing here, just treat hair as any other texture, and you would be able to focus much more on its depth, like its three-dimensionalness, and much less on just drawing individual strings while managing lighting and all of that. So if you draw hair like this, notice that there is context for the hair. It is around the head. It is around the head, and it wraps around her body, which gives her her body context as well, as being part of her being this three-dimensional person. And all of that is done by taking into consideration right at the beginning where the light comes from, and by drawing from general to specific, going from where the light comes from, what shapes are the shadows, and then you begin to add small details if you choose to the picture. And no matter which part, no matter which part of the process you stop at, like even if you stop here, it's going to have, even though it's really rough, it's going to look like your image has a 3D presence. And that's the most important part when you make sure that this comes across from the very beginning, rather than trying to like paint it in as you begin to realize that it might look a little flat. So these are the things that I think could add to your future pieces if you can try to like take it into account right at the beginning. Think about it a lot. You don't have to do it the same way, but consider these things. Take more time to think about the piece before you go in and shade almost instinctively, and it will be a lot easier for you to make a piece look more like structurally sound without you trying very hard.